Hey, this is Lorena, and I wanted to do a video for you on an antique quilt that I did recently. Yes, and this quilt was torture. Being honest, it was like the worst quilt. One of the worst quilts I've ever quilted. One of the problems that I had with this quilt, it was 4 inches off. It was kind of oblong, is that the word? It was 94 inches on one side and 89 inches on the other. And it was 71 inches on one side and it was 76 inches. So it was long in certain corners. So yeah, it was in the horizontal lines, it was off 4 inches, and on the vertical lines, it was off 5 inches. And so one of the things that I did to kind of deal with the warpness of the quilt is I put it on a horizontal. Usually I tend to put my quilts on the long vertical, you know, and I roll it and I roll it and I roll it till I finish it. But this quilt, I went ahead and I put it on the horizontal. Now, this quilt was a bit different because the client only wanted me to quilt the center of it, and so yeah, this was a hard quilt. See how it's like right at the bottom, and then when you go here, it goes up. And then you see the line is pretty straight on the bar, kind of dips down right there. So maybe when I pull it or roll it, I can kind of roll that fabric up a bit and get rid of some of that fullness. I already got rid of about 2 inches of fullness by the way I moved the fabric on the top. I kind of pushed it up a little bit. And so if you get a quilt and you find out that it really is off, the faster you start kind of pulling up the fabric, the better. Because then you don't have to have as many pleats, or you don't have a big, giant, huge section of a mess that is puddling over because you didn't know how bad it was. What I ended up doing is when I started quilting it, it literally disintegrated right here. The quilting, so I took it off, basted it down, and I'm going to applique this little triangles here so you can see it. I'm having to be very careful because of the way she tried to fix this. She just zigzagged around what was falling apart, I'm sure. And no matter, the quilt is not straight, and you can kind of straighten it, but you can't. I also had a piece of fabric here, it tore, so I was trying to kind of figure out how to fix it. So I'm gonna just, I'm gonna let the machine run through it, and then I'm gonna applique a piece of this on it. So if you have an antique quilt and it is in really bad shape, what you can do, and it's already quilted and put together, you can hand applique those areas where the thread is kind of fraying or thinning out. You can fill it and put applique pieces and hand stitch it down real pretty, and no one would know the difference that you went back and kind of pieced extra fabric on there. So that's something that you can do. Now, I did do this for the client, but I didn't show it in a video because by the time I finished quilting this quilt, it took me like 7 hours to finish it, and that included the trimming, the applique, and also sewing all the pieces so that I could have it ready for her to pick up. And by the time I was downstairs in my living room, I don't have a lot of light, and I was exhausted by the stress of the quilt. Yes, quilts can be stressful. And so I went ahead and just kind of didn't film, so I'm sorry. Make sure it doesn't get caught anywhere because these seams are crazy. Right now I'm gonna roll the quilt, and she doesn't want anything quilted here. And then the quilt is so fragile that it's like the fabric just fell apart when I quilted it. And then here, when I put it on, there was a tear, and there's a couple areas, like look how thin the fabric is, like right there. Yeah. She didn't want any quilting here, which is fine. So I am like sewing it down completely. So when she goes to bind it, it's shut down. And so let me roll this quilt and go from there. I learned the most from these quilts. I learned how to shrink in fabric from these quilts. I learned starching really helps. So I've learned the most from working these quilts. So this is what you want, kind of decently even. It's still angled down, and I did it long ways to try to help me, and this is what fullness is. Now I may let it not be even just a little bit, to where I don't think the client will notice it that much. Do not pull too much on these antique quilts, because you will. They're so like they're so like, please don't fall apart on me. Don't burn yourself, because it does hurt. So these kind of take more work. And so when people are like, oh, can you quilt this for me? Yes, you can. Just know it's more work. It's not just a simple quilt that you're just gonna la 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 la. So I kind of got it a lot down. I honestly like pleating. You can move the fullness around, but pleating literally gets rid of fabric the best. Like the fullness, you can kind of like move, but then you'll end up having little tiny pleats everywhere, which I think it's worse than just having pleating. One pleat here, it looks like a seam, and because of the angle of the, you can make it look like, and you're not changing this. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the fabric here and I'm tugging it as if it is one of those weird seams, like this, like that. So I'm going to get my material, or my sewing machine, my long arm, that's the word, and you could kind of pull to where you're not changing the way the pleat is, and just baste this down, and then I go ahead and sew it down by hand. I am going to have to fix some of those triangles that fell apart on me anyway. It's a small little tiny tuck, and it does like literally pull up the fabric a lot. And you didn't change any of this here, which is a great thing. Okay, so then now I have nothing else is gonna pleat here, which is what you don't want. I hate little pleats. It's a pretty quilt. Look at this. I think on the camera it looks beautiful. You see how it angles down? It's not horrible. It was worse. It was angled down. And now I got it. I've kind of like took up about 1.5 inches, 2 inches on the first row, 1.5 inches or 2 on the other row, And it just needs maybe a smidge. Just a smidge right there. Maybe a 1/2 inch. So I could get it straight. Just start here a little bit. And the reason I'm going to start there and iron is I want to see if I could take it up just a bit. Because I want to see if I could square this thing up. And ironing and restarching is really great.